Good afternoon, everyone. I declare open this hearing of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Law Enforcement into the capabilities of law enforcement to respond to money laundering and financial crime. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. The committee will be conducting today's hearing via video conference and in person. There are public proceedings being video streamed live via the Parliamentary website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Parliament as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false and misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will be insistent on an answer having regard to the ground on which it's claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. I remind parliamentarians of their obligations under the Behaviour Code for Australian parliamentarians to treat witnesses with dignity, courtesy, fairness and respect. I remind witnesses who are appearing via video conference and who are not speaking to mute their microphones, please. I now welcome representatives from the Griffin University. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to parliamentary committees has been provided to you for the Hansard record. Would you please state your full names and capacity in which you appear today? And I understand that we also have someone as part of this from the La Trobe Law School. So welcome to you all, and if you could each please state your full name and capacity in which you're appearing today.
My name is Andreas Chai. I'm a professor and director of the Academy of Excellence in Financial Crime Investigation Compliance at Griffith University.
My name is Nui Surachat Kamthonprun. I am a senior lecturer from the Department of Tourism and Marketing from Griffith Business School.
And my name is Craig Robertson. I'm a senior industry fellow at the Griffith University as part of the Academy of Financial Crime that's run by Andreas.
Louis de Coker, Professor of Law at La Trobe Law School, closely working with Griffith University in this context.
Welcome to you all. You did provide the opening comments to the committee, so thank you for that. Does anyone want to add any comments to that opening statement?
Yeah, we have some additional comments to the working to that opening statement. Louis, do you want to go first with your additional comments?
Thank you, Professor Chai. Yes, Andreas, Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and to the members of the committee also, thank you for this opportunity to address you on these important matters. Now, our joint submission and the opening statement outlines the breadth of the issues that we are touching on. I will focus in particular on the importance of requiring and funding law enforcement agencies to share appropriate data with reporting entities to support evidence-based risk assessment and risk mitigation. In essence, the AML-CTF framework draws a wide range of businesses and professionals into a crime combating environment, essentially enlisting them as law enforcement agents, but often not empowering them as such. So reporting entities must implement policies and processes to protect their businesses from money laundering, terrorism financing, proliferation financing, and from sanctions breaches. and must monitor activity to confidentially report suspicious and other prescribed matters to AUSTRAC. Their ability to do this well depends on their understanding of the relevant offences and, importantly, of the most likely forms of abuse that they may face, given the nature, the scope and the location of their businesses and their customers. So how well do the so-called Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 entities, often ordinary business persons, understand these crime risks and identify their highest vulnerabilities? AUSTRAC recognises the need for information and guidance and has done a lot in this space, especially in relation to Tranche 2 in the past weeks. But we hold that more is required to ensure that professionals and small businesses can adequately assess and manage their crime risks, including their proliferation financing risks. An international study I conducted in 2022-2023 found that these private sector entities face substantial implementation challenges in addressing proliferation financing risk, largely due to the complexity of the issues relating to chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons of mass destruction. When reporting entities do not identify their crime risks accurately or mitigate them effectively and proportionately, they become vulnerable to abuse and to enforcement action. With tens of thousands of new reporting entities, such failures could impose a substantial burden on law enforcement agencies. Conversely, where entities over-assess risks and over-engineer their controls, which often happens when they are uncertain about risks that carry significant criminal penalties, we see unintended consequences, such as debanking, a particularly acute issue for the Pacific Islands and for a range of Australian communities and sectors, as identified in research done at La Trobe and Griffith universities. Overly conservative approaches also increase business costs. Globally, AML-CTF compliance costs is estimated to amount to more than $200 billion per year. To avoid these negative outcomes and to ensure that the AML-CTF regime strengthens personal and national security, we believe it's vital that law enforcement share appropriate data with reporting entities. This information should be available in formats suitable for both large institutions and small businesses, supported by clear interpretational guidance. The data must be accessible and must enable reporting entities to identify the most likely threats they face, assess both higher and lower risk areas, and to design effective proportionate control measures. This data should also inform regulatory reviews to identify and remedy over and under-designed risk control measures. Furthermore, law enforcement agencies should track the actual crime prevention impact of AML-CTF measures, report those results annually to Parliament, and use the findings to inform any improvements to their data sharing measures. Chair, in closing, doing this properly requires appropriate funding for law enforcement agencies. Without an appropriate investment in the sharing of such information, reporting entities will focus on ticking compliance boxes, and the resulting red tape will burden businesses without delivering meaningful crime combating value for Australia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will start with some questions and then go to my colleagues. But in the latest Griffith University submission, you explained that Australia faces critical skill shortages in financial crime investigation, with the workforce training landscape significantly underdeveloped compared to the US and the EU. Can you explain to the committee the difference in the arrangements and how the US and the EU are further along in this area of crime?
Yeah, thanks very much. Griffith University has started a Masters of Financial Crime Investigation Compliance recently, and as part of that, we did a bit of an audit about how these trainings were undertaken across different countries, and had a deeper look at the types of skills that are required to investigate, report financial crime. And in our assessments, it is an extremely complex task which involves skills from a number of different disciplines, including criminology, forensic accounting, information technology, as well as law. Based on what we have observed at other universities in the US and in Europe, just by the fact that they have got more experience in this area in terms of the length of the regulation has been around and close collaboration between law enforcement and the university sectors in those countries, there are more specialised courses available at the tertiary education level that experts can take. At the moment in Australia, a lot of the career pathways into this area, there is a little bit of professional on-the-job learning that you take, but a lot of it comes down to discovering these skills and people having done things in accounting or in law enforcement and then becoming more specialised as we go. And the issue is that at the moment, because of the changes in the regulations, there's a bit of a skills shortage and we need to develop more direct career pathways into this area, as well as that, and help law enforcement agencies to become more specialised. Because what we're finding, talking to law enforcement, is that it requires a team of people, and this is really important to make sure that the right skills are there. So universities can play a role in that by working with law enforcement to make sure that there are career pathways for students to get into law enforcement, to make sure that they have the right skills, as well as upskilling the law enforcement, the teams there. So Griffith University has worked with law enforcement on those issues, and we're also developing career pathways for undergraduate and postgraduate students to get into this really important area. But we think that more is needed on the national level to make sure that this critical shortage that is coming very, very soon is fully addressed.
Thank you for that. In terms of the relationship in the EU and the US with their law enforcement in ensuring that there is a workforce that's highly skilled and trained going forward, was that the law enforcement that reached out to the university or vice versa?
I'm not exactly sure how it got started, but what I can tell you is that there are specific universities in the US and as well as that in the UK that work very, very closely with law enforcement on these issues. The Ruse Institute, for example, in the UK is one such example. So not only do they provide training, but they provide thought leadership, and that kind of helps them build the capabilities on an ongoing basis. I would note on that point too that the UK, the National Economic Crime Centre, publishes areas of research interest, which it encourages universities and academics to do research on particular questions. For example, one of the questions that I put forward is corruption prevention training effective? So in that way, universities can play a role in specifically helping law enforcement capabilities in answering important questions that help mitigate financial crime.
Do you think there's a willingness in the general university community to become more active in this area and providing those opportunities for students to study?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a massive interest in this. For universities, we've not only launched a master's in Australia, but we've also launched one in Hong Kong with the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And the student interest in this area is off the charts. It's incredible. What we really need is sort of support from law enforcement where it's possible to build up those opportunities, and banks as well. So we work with banks to sort of provide those opportunities for students to get internships. So there's definitely a huge interest. And what I think would help with getting more universities interested in this is thinking about particular research programs that sort of prioritise this area. For example, if you look at national security, the Office of National Intelligence has a special research program that answers important questions in that particular area. And building up something similar in Australia, similar to what's been done in the UK, would make a lot of sense and encourage more universities to get involved into this area.
Thank you for that. In the latest submission, you point out there is a lack of empirical evidence demonstrating which anti-money laundering measures actually work in reducing criminal activities. Can you unpack that and explain that a bit more?
Louis, do you want to take this one?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Chair. In general, there is limited empirical research about the effectiveness of AML-CTF measures globally. So what we have is a set of measures. To that set of measures, we find international standards adding more and more. But we haven't been able to identify which of those measures work better than others. They come as a package, and this package grows as more and more is grafted onto it. And there's increasing concern. I mentioned the $200 billion in compliance costs annually. There's increasing concern that there isn't an equivalent obvious reduction in crime that was expected when these standards were initially adopted. There is an increasing body of research questioning whether all of the measures are required, whether all of them work effectively well in the current context than they were intended to work, let's say in the early 1990s and the end of the 1980s. But these are questions mostly because the empirical data to track that, and especially the law enforcement data to track that, is not generally available. So as researchers, we are asking the questions. In conjunction with law enforcement, we can move much closer to credible answers of these questions. And that's why it's so important to establish an improved relationship where research can be done that strengthens law enforcement in the national interest. Thank you.
Thank you. If we're looking at the amount of money that's obviously generated by money laundering and other crimes, how do we then measure the cost of law enforcement as to how effective they are in preventing such crime, and what sort of research would you undertake to actually come up with a paper that actually says, well, it costs this amount of money to try and prevent this through law enforcement versus how much is generated by money laundering and organised crime in the country? Where would that research and how would you conduct that?
I think that's an interesting question, Senator. Let me give you an example. When the FATF, the international body, grey lists a country, it can lead to enforcement action. So what we can study is basically how countries that are under pressure by the FATF respond and how illicit funds moving through that system are reported. While we don't know exactly how the size of the shadow economy, it's very hard to get a good estimate of that. There are ways in which that can be done. The ABS produces some measures of that, the ATO as well. What we can see is how criminal activity responds when there are enforcement actions. And an important thing to measure in that particular response too is not just how the amount of illicit funds and prosecutions change. It also is important to measure substitution effects. So to give you one really common example is that there are such things as shadow banks, so informal money handlers, both in Australia and everywhere in the world. And when the FATF tends to crack down in countries through grey-listing, we are aware that that can create more business for shadow economic activity. So an important way to measure the effectiveness of law enforcement would be to explore how these actions not only result in more seizures, in more arrests, but it would also be important to see how much economic activity or financial flows are also diverted to shadow banks as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Have you had much interaction with AUSTRAC? And are they engaged with the university?
I think, Craig, would you like to respond? I think we've had very positive engagement with AUSTRAC. We are currently collaborating with AUSTRAC on a research project. But I think, Craig, you've had longer experience with AUSTRAC. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andreas, and thank you, Chair. Yeah, as Andreas says, I think AUSTRAC are quite engaged in looking at opportunities both on the research topics, some of which we've been talking about today, and how they can sponsor that to be not only beneficial to Australia, but also, as Louis alluded to the close neighbours of Australia as well, in building capacity that brings benefit both to those countries and Australia as well. Specific to the skills side of things, I'm not aware that AUSTRAC have been involved in the development of any of the content yet, but have certainly been happy to see members of the private sector, etc., working as part of the university credentials that Andrea spoke about before, so that there's an accredited way to learn and apply their trade working in financial crime roles. And certainly we'd like to see that extended out to further law enforcement involvement, as we talked about earlier in the session too. But they're probably the areas that I would cite AUSTRAC's engagement in the research and the training side. They also play a lot of roles in a wider sphere than that, but that's more specific to the university side.
Thank you for that. One of your recommendations in your submission is law enforcement should adopt emerging technologies in collaboration with the industry and to enhance investigations and counter the use of AI and similar technologies. Can someone elaborate a bit more on that? Because obviously AI is a very powerful tool, whether it's in the bad guys' hands or us good guys. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? Because I think that's a really important element.
Yeah, would you like me to take that one, Andreas?
Sure.
Yes, and it's a great question. As you know, criminals are already definitely exploiting artificial intelligence to commit crimes, to also help them move money, etc. And I think from both a people upskill perspective, as well as capabilities that law enforcement can use, artificial intelligence needs to play a role, as you say, on the good side as well. If I could pick maybe two examples, one of them can go back to research. We've seen recent research turn into very innovative ways where AI can help even prevent crimes from happening. So diversion approaches, for example, if people are to be a victim of a scam where the email content or voice content can be diverted to AI bots to essentially take the time up of the scammer and not have that touch the intended victim. And I think we've seen other examples in the past where capability that law enforcement would take time to build is available to them, and in partnering with technology providers that can be then used in investigations. If you look at blockchain as an example, perhaps something like on-chain analytics to trace cryptocurrency is a good example of that law enforcement have certainly availed of. And there would be other opportunities around how they could use artificial intelligence to deal with things like unstructured information, actually finding criminal behaviours online, and also some of those opportunities to prevent or counter criminals that could certainly be there. I think there's an opportunity two ways there. There's research partnership as well as actually working with technology providers to use tech to do some of those things.
And as you said, upskilling the law enforcement workforce can take time. So those partnerships are very important, I would have thought, going forward to be able to keep up with the ever-changing technology.
I think that's right, Chair, yeah. And whether that's a partnership in an advisory capacity to understand the technology and how it can be used in the law enforcement context, or whether that's a partnership to co-develop technology that's very specific to the needs for law enforcement, or whether it's a partnership to just access technology that's already there to help with some of the things like I mentioned before. I think, you've kind of got those three buckets of opportunity.
In terms of the university's research that you're working on now, is there anything else that you want to add that you're currently undertaking or under consideration in relation to this area? Because it doesn't seem to matter. I mean, there are no borders globally anymore when it comes to crimes such as this. So whenever you speak to someone from another country in law enforcement or parliamentarians, they're all grappling with the same issue. So we will actually get some information, if we can, about the centre in the UK to see what they're doing. I think would be helpful for the committee. But is there any other work that you're undertaking that would be of benefit for the committee to be made aware of today?
Nui, do you want to talk about the dark patterns?
Yes, yeah. Actually, I also would like to add in terms of using AI in detecting dark pattern as well. Dark pattern is part of the web user experience that many e-commerce websites actually utilize to put some deceptive tactics to get users to basically buy or provide information that may not wanted to provide. And I think actually AI university can actually utilize the knowledge and research using AI to actually keep track of which website that actually utilize this dark pattern and prevent that from happening as well. And another area that university can also focus on is in the area of actually looking at training, putting an education training, looking at the ways to improve financial crime awareness and scam awareness, how to improve the effectiveness of this type of training, especially among the younger generations, high school students as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Senator, I might just add one comment to that question as well around current research. There's some work that's about to commence with Griffith University that's looking at creating synthetic data. I think Louis mentioned in his opening comments around the challenges around accessing data that represents information about financial crime and the criminal activity, and using that synthetic information to then start to apply ways to learn patterns and behaviours to detect and find, if you like, bad actor activity, as well as then work out how that can be of assistance to both law enforcement and private sector participants in the financial crime framework as well. So while it's just yet to commence, I think it's worth mentioning that those are some of the things that are on the minds from the university research perspective at the moment.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Senator?
Yes.
If I may just add to that, I think we are at a very exciting time. After many years, we have a number of universities now working in this space in Australia, and I think importantly collaborating. And I think my presence here today on this panel is one example of that. There's also the Financial Integrity Hub that we are all participating in, and the bridges are being built with the public sector and with law enforcement agencies. But there is an urgency. And there's also an urgency in relation to investment. There's great work that's been done by the Australian Institute for Criminology, also in the costing space in relation to anti-money laundering. But we need to build on that and weave that together into practical results that can improve law enforcement outcomes in Australia. And I think what you're hearing today is the doors open from the university side. We are also collaborating closely with global colleagues because, as you've pointed out, this is a global problem. It has been recognised as such for the past 35 years. But we're not going to solve it by working in silos, and we're not going to solve it without working with a strategy. And I think there's a wonderful ball currently in the hands of this committee to add to that strategy and the development of the strategy from a law enforcement perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions. And if you have anything else out of the hearing that you wanted to submit, we would be appreciative of that. But can I thank you for both your submissions and for all of you giving your time today. It is very valuable. 35 years or more we've been in this space, and we have to learn to collaborate if we're going to ensure that we're doing everything that we can. And as has been noted in most submissions, and that is we have to be able to fund law enforcement and these collaborations. So thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Just before we go to the next, can you just check with your colleagues that they're happy to publish all of those opening statements, the 3 opening statements?
Right, okay. Do that. Yes. Before I welcome our next witnesses, just want to check with my colleagues that you're happy to publish the 2 opening statements that have been provided thus far?
I'm happy for that to happen, Chair.
Great, thank you, Mr. Brian. Sorry. Okay, I now welcome representatives from the Victorian Legal Services Board and Commissioner. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to parliamentary committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please each state your full name and capacity in which you appear today?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Fiona McClay. I am the Victorian Legal Services Commissioner and the CEO of the Legal Services Board in Victoria.
Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Alice Duggan.
Sorry.
Michelle, your microphone is not on. Oh, sorry. Alice, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the manager.
Alice, was you speaking to us before because we couldn't hear you? Do you want to repeat that for us, please?
Sorry, that was me.
We can hear you now.
My name's Alice Duggan and I'm the Director of Detection and Intervention
Duggan may have
For the Victorian Legal
a live
Services Board
stream
Commissioner.
on, so
Oh,
she's
right.
getting feedback, so I just suggest.
Yes. You may have live stream on, which is causing that feedback. So bear with us. Michelle, are you going to introduce yourself for the Hansard record, please? You haven't got your microphone on, sorry, you're on mute.
Hello, Chair. I'm sorry. My name is Michelle Marchett. I'm the Manager of Policy and Regulatory Strategy at the Victorian Legal Services Board and Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Who's going to make the opening statement?
Chair, I'd be pleased to do that. As I've just said, I'm Fiona McClay. I'm basically the regulator of the legal profession here in the state of Victoria. I thought I'd start just briefly outlining who we are and how we work. Legal regulation in Australia is a complex beast, and so I'll position this organisation in that context, and then to the more relevant part, which is why we're interested in this topic. And thank you very much, Chair and your senators, for inviting us to address you. So, Services Board and Legal Services Commissioner are the two independent statutory bodies which regulate the legal profession in Victoria. We do this under the rubric of the Legal Profession Uniform Law, which provides a uniform framework for legal regulation in Victoria, New South Wales and Western Australia, and any other states that might choose to join in the future. Each of the Board and Commissioner have distinct regulatory responsibilities under our legislation, but in practice we operate as the one organisation with the rather unwieldy acronym of the VLSB and C. So if you hear me make that word jumble, you'll know what I'm talking about. We are the end-to-end regulator for the legal profession. The Board is a licensing body, makes decisions about whether Victorian lawyers are fit and proper to be granted a practicing certificate, have their certificates renewed. Also, we're responsible for monitoring, inspecting and conducting investigations of law practices trust accounts, which again is very relevant to the proceedings that you're chairing today. We undertake internal interventions into law practices, effectively a management kind of function, and we can prosecute or assist police to prosecute law practice associates who engage in fraud or dishonesty with respect to trust accounts. The Commissioner's function is effectively the legal ombudsman, handling complaints about conduct of lawyers and taking disciplinary action where appropriate. Complaints can be made by anyone. They mostly come to us, though, by clients for, self-evident reasons. I do have own motion powers, and the conduct in question can extend to lawyers' behaviour outside of legal practice. So, as a legal regulator, we are very alive to the risk of lawyer involvement in money laundering and financial crime, which is why we made submissions to this committee's inquiry, and we've been closely following the AML and CTF reforms, which we welcome. So I'll give you a little bit more information and context now about our interest in this area and our powers, unless anyone has any questions about my overview.
No, that was great. Thank you.
So, as I'm sure the committee is aware, lawyers have very strict ethical obligations to their clients, to the courts and to the justice system, and importantly extends to the way they deal with client money. There are various ways lawyers can lawfully come to hold money for their clients in trust, which is the law practices trust account. They can receive funds in advance of providing legal services. They might receive money subject to instructions to pay or deliver that money to a third party. A property settlement is the classic example. But the nature of their work also means that they can be used by criminals to conceal and launder illegally obtained money. And lawyers' trust accounts can be misused to legitimise criminal activity and hide the proceeds of crime. Sometimes lawyers who facilitate money laundering and financial crime do so unwittingly. They just aren't aware of the arrangements that sit behind what the client's asking them to do. But there are lawyers who we are aware of who are willingly facilitating their clients' criminal activities. We often refer to these as lawyer enablers, enabling the criminal conduct of their clients. This is fundamentally corrosive to public trust and confidence in the justice system and the rule of law, and we take it extremely seriously, which is why we welcome the extension of AML-CTF legislation to the designated services provided by lawyers. We have been supporting that work for a long time. We think it's imperative that lawyers take active steps to ensure they don't facilitate this conduct. So we do have powers, as I've mentioned, to identify and respond to money laundering and financial crime, particularly through misuse of trust accounts. We do have systems in place to monitor trust accounts and quite extensive powers to audit trust accounts and investigate discrepancies in those accounts. If we become aware of apparent or potential involvement in money laundering by a lawyer, we will investigate and take action. This might involve suspending or cancelling practicing certificates or filing disciplinary charges with our tribunal, with VCAT. It's important to understand that the regulatory framework for lawyers is based on lawyers being ethical and upholding the law. It starts from that assumption. And so our investigative powers are therefore usually triggered by complaints made by consumers or by other intelligence that alerts us to a potential problem. So this is a challenge for us when the client themselves is involved in criminal behaviour. They are very unlikely to complain about their lawyer if the lawyer is helping them do the criminal thing that they are doing. There's also no mandatory requirement for lawyers to tell us if they suspect that other lawyers are involved in misconduct of this kind, serious misconduct, although I note this was a recommendation of a previous Royal Commission here in Victoria. So it does then present some challenges for us in relation to identifying this conduct. A few other challenges that I thought it would be useful at a high level to bring to your attention before we pause and we can drill down is around information sharing. And I note that the conversation you were having with the people appearing before you previously ended on that note. We work very hard to build relationships and establish information sharing arrangements with law enforcement and other regulatory bodies who can help us identify lawyers who are involved in money laundering and financial crime. But the structure of the information sharing provisions within their legislation mean that we're not always able to access or use their intelligence for our regulatory or enforcement purposes. So, for example, Commonwealth bodies with enhanced powers in relation to money laundering, like the AFP, AUSTRAC or the Criminal Assets Confiscation Task Force, may have information relevant to our regulatory function, but there are limits to what they can share with us. Banks are also another area where we face some challenges. We, under the Uniform Law, authorise deposit-taking institutions, banks, who are authorised to hold trust monies, and they need to report trust practice irregularities to us. This is a really important source of intelligence for us in identifying money laundering practices. We can see transactions through trust accounts which are suspicious. But banks haven't consistently complied with this requirement to share information with us, and in some cases have been reluctant to share information due to concerns that doing so may enliven the tipping off provisions in the AML-CTF Act. The Worst amendments made last year to reframe the tipping off offence, and we understand that disclosures to law enforcement agencies generally won't be considered to breach the tipping off offence. So we're very pleased about those amendments, and we hope that this will encourage banks to fulfil their obligations under the Uniform Law in relation to alerting us to this sort of conduct. So that's, I guess, the scope of my opening comments. My two colleagues, Alice and Michelle. Michelle, as you heard, looks after our policy function, and Alice is the director who's work focuses most closely in this area. So any one of the three of us would be happy to provide you with further detail about anything that you would like to explore.
Thank you very much. I was interested when you were explaining that if the client is participating in illegal activities and money laundering or wanting to hide money for whatever reason, they're not likely to put a complaint in relation to that lawyer. When you have a lawyer who is using a trust account then to money launder, to hide money for a client because they're facing bankruptcy, how then is it a third party that would give you the tip-off so you can investigate that? Or is that something, again, where you're relying on banks to say, well, there's this money just sitting there, it's been sitting there for some time, is that suspicious, do we need to investigate? Can you step us through that process, please?
Yeah, great. I think Alice is best placed to take that.
Yes.
They need to. I think you need to encourage them to use one device in the same room.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. We're just checking if there's still feedback whether or not we shouldn't have you both, if possible, in the same room with just one device. But yeah, because we're getting a lot of feedback.
And can we go?
So mine's muted. Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes, that's better.
Now, so yes, we get our information from a range of sources. Primarily, we do get consumer complaints, what we call client complaints. But there are other ways that we get our intelligence that are both formal and informal. So we can use our informal powers for a range of things. There's a mandatory reporting obligation on external examiners, on all lawyers in Victoria and on our ADIs, which is the banks, to report any irregularities that they might see in the trust account. That's got mixed kind of results because the word irregularity isn't defined within the legislation. But we do get information through that way. We also, every trust account in Victoria is externally examined by a team of external examiners who provide reports to us once a year on whether or not law practices are complying with their record-keeping obligations, and we look at those reports pretty closely, and that can usually be an indication that we need to take a closer look and do trust account investigations. And then we have more informal kind of ways of getting information through our agreements with law enforcement bodies and other regulators. So there's a range of different ways that we get intelligence that kind of forms a picture of whether or not we need to look closely at law practices, particularly if they're involved in things that might not be apparent, or if there is an active kind of way to avoid detection, for lack of a better word.
Thank you for that. In your submission, you explained that you had received information from ASIC about lawyers' misconduct, but because the legislation restricts on disclosure, you cannot take any regulatory action based on that information. How many lawyers are still practising in Victoria who are known by the regulator to have engaged in misconduct because of this restriction?
I think perhaps a better way to answer that would be to say that in the last 5 years, we've become aware of about 10 lawyers that are engaging in this kind of conduct which appears to be linked to money laundering or avoiding AUSTRAC obligations. To put that in context, we regulate about 30,000 lawyers. That's not to say that those lawyers are necessarily still practising having engaged in that conduct, but that is conduct that caused us to take a bit of a look. But as I mentioned, it has not been easy to identify the conduct. So I can't really give you a kind of figure beyond that.
well, what needs to happen to be able to address this so that you can actually not only investigate, but there can be outcomes so that there's misconduct and restrictions so that these bad actors as lawyers are out of the workplace?
Yeah, I think information sharing is really a key to that. As I mentioned, we do our best to build those relationships, and we've got some formal information sharing arrangements in place. But there is a need for more of those. I think Alice and Michelle are best placed to deal with that in more detail.
I'd agree wholeheartedly. It's information sharing provisions, but it's also clarity about what can be done with that information, and the more clarity that can be provided. But I accept it is so tricky that we want. These are nuanced, complex, and they have to be balanced with a lot of regulatory requirements, but the clarity on what can be used and when it can be used would be a real gift for us working in this space.
Maybe you could give an example of
Yes. Me.
Apologies, Senator. One thing I would add to my colleague Alice's comment is that the nature of the legislative provisions is really very important. So there are, of course, very solid reasons why legislative provisions would restrict agencies from sharing information with other regulatory agencies or even to use to which that information can be put. Of course, there are important procedural steps that need to be followed, particularly in any criminal matter. But going to your question about what needs to change, I think it's a broader approach to information sharing across the federal system, so sharing information between federal and state agencies. Right now it is possible for us to have very good relationships with our federal colleagues and to receive information and to even apply to receive information formally, but actually using that in evidence in a case against someone, providing that evidence collected by another agency to individuals involved in a disciplinary matter is much more difficult. And those are the things that we are called upon to do by our own tribunal as a matter of procedural fairness. So if we can't do any of those things with the information provided, it begs the question whether we would take action at all.
Is that helpful, or I can give you a de-identified example,
I guess. Give us an example of that, I think would be helpful to demonstrate that it's one thing to have a good relationship and sharing the information, but if it can't be used, is that information really useful?
Yeah. So I've got a little example here. So ASIC can provide information about agencies under Section 127 of the ASIC Act. And it specifically contemplates disclosing information to prescribed regulatory bodies, which would include us. The information disclosed, it carries statutory conditions that the recipient can't disclose it to anyone else and must not use it for any purpose other than deciding whether to take disciplinary action or not taking action. So that creates an immediate catch-22 for us, because we're bound by procedural fairness requirements as we must, and as Michelle has said, if we want to prosecute, then we have to disclose that information to the lawyer who we are prosecuting. And our decisions are made subject to review by VCAT, and the VCAT Act also requires that we provide relevant documents to VCAT if we are prosecuting a lawyer in VCAT. And so we run into that, as I say, that catch-22. ASIC can release material under other powers and impose conditions on a case-by-case basis, but our understanding is that ASIC typically provides material for background information purposes only. So this puts us in the really invidious position where we might actually have material about a lawyer that might warrant regulatory or disciplinary action, but we cannot undisclose that information. And so we have to consider whether we can in fact take any action at all.
Yeah, that was a very good example there. you were seeking to establish formal information sharing arrangements with the AFP, the ATO, Tax Practitioners Board, ASIC and ACIC. Have these been established now? And if not, have there been stumbling blocks for those that are they? Is it working now with sharing of information?
Yeah, I'll let Alice take that one.
It's definitely well more advanced than it was when we made this submission. Actually, reading the submission feels like that was a long time ago. And particularly with AUSTRAC, we've had a lot of very meaningful discussions with AUSTRAC about moving towards a formal information sharing relationship. But at the moment, even that informal kind of sharing of information, sharing of ways to work and different ways to approach the same problem has been really positive. I won't go through the list individually, but I'll also say AFP, we've been, right up until yesterday, been having some really productive conversations with them. We have a memorandum of understanding with Victoria State with Vic Police, and we're looking to kind of replicate that with the Federal Police, and that's been really productive as well.
Well, that's good. I was wondering if we could go back to some comments that you made in your opening statement in relation to tipping off offences. Can you just explain that a little more for committee members?
Again, I'm going to pass that to Alice. This is a passion project of Alice, so she's best placed to take you through that.
It has been the source of immense frustration, and I think there's another example that Fiona just gave of with ASIC has been really common with dealing with, particularly with the banks and getting information, but then being told we're not allowed to use that information, or that information shouldn't have been provided to us, and if we disclose that information to other parties, then we would be in breach of tipping off procedures. It's just a stickiness to being able to get information. People are very reluctant to enter into conversations with us because they're frightened, and they're pretty significant penalties under the tipping off, so they do invoke a very cautious approach to being able to share information. I'm optimistic that the changes that have been made to the legislation might see a change in that way of working, but it is very early to be able to tell that. But previously it has been a really big issue for us.
So the engagement you've had with AUSTRAC, do they understand the situation, and are they looking at ensuring that, you know, there's some changes coming forward? Is it a matter now of just going through that process, or are there other sticking blocks?
I'm really optimistic that there is. We've had multiple conversations with them. We've been part of roundtable discussions about this particular issue. We've been reassured that there'll be very specific guidance, that we do fall within certain exemptions, and that the essence of that this information sharing is supposed to be for the benefit of all of us as regulators. That's a message that I understand AUSTRAC particularly committed to putting forward to everybody involved.
Excellent.
So we'll be following it closely, and if there's issues, we'll raise them.
Look, that would. I just want to say that, you know, your submission and the fact that you've appeared before us today is really important. But I think, as you said at the beginning, you know, the initial witnesses, I mean, it really is about collaborating, and it's about sharing information, because this is such a huge global issue, but it's having a real impact on our communities. But I would be really looking at keeping a watching brief to see some changes when it comes to, you know, that catch-22 situation, resolving that, so that that sharing of information can actually ensure that you're able to take whatever action is deemed appropriate to get those lawyers not working in that area. Otherwise, it just seems to be, you know, futile, whole exercise. So I will just check with my colleagues to note there's your submission and your evidence today is obviously covered off for them as well. But thank you very much for what you do. It is a matter of collaboration. and working to ensure the good guys win out over the baddies every chance we get. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Greatly appreciated.
It's our pleasure. If we can be of any further assistance to the committee or to any of the senators, don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Witness, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming in this afternoon. I'd like to officially welcome you, and I understand that you've had the information on parliamentary privilege provided to you for the protection of witnesses giving evidence to parliamentary committees. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and capacity in which you appear today, and then I'll ask you to, if you want to, make a short opening statement.
Thank you. I'm Anton Moisenko, Senior Lecturer in Law at the Australian National University, where I teach financial crime law, among other things, and I'm also an Associate Fellow at the Centre for Finance and Security at RUSI, a British defence and security think tank, where I worked on financial crime matters in the UK and Europe previously.
Great. Well, thank you very much for appearing before us. Would you like to make an opening statement or some comments before I go to my colleagues and myself for some questions?
Thank you. I would like to start with a couple of big picture observations, if I may. I think that if one looks at the effectiveness of Australian responses to money laundering and other financial crimes, there are two different stories that one can tell. One story is one of success, and that relies in particular on the many achievements of AUSTRAC, the Financial Intelligence Unit and Anti-Money Laundering Regulator. There have also been truly remarkable achievements attained by the Australian Federal Police over the past couple of years as relates to Australian-based but also international organised crime with presence in this country. And I would note in particular the operations carried out by Task Force Everest, which focuses specifically on high-value money laundering enablers, as no doubt you will have heard and will hear more during the course of this inquiry. And the final crown in the jewel that has emerged over the past couple of years is the extension of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing reporting obligations to designated non-financial businesses and professions, so-called Tranche 2 entities. So all of that combined paints a picture of progress, and I think there is a great deal of truth in that, but it's also important to tell the countervailing story, and that is perhaps one of lesser rather than greater success and of lesser focus. And the way that I like to think about the challenges that Australia faces is it's important to remember that, like any developed international trading and financial centre, Australia has got to contend with proceeds of domestic crimes that are generated and therefore laundered within this jurisdiction, but also proceeds of international crimes that wash onto Australia's shores. That relates in particular to proceeds of foreign corruption, but also other serious criminal offences. And my sense is that it is in that domain that Australian law enforcement agencies have not yet demonstrated the same level of success that they have when it comes to domestic organised crime. For example, unlike any of the international peers, for example, the United States, the United Kingdom or Canada, Australia has not seen major examples of prosecutions related to laundering the proceeds of foreign corruption or even confiscation actions that are comparable to major asset recovery undertakings that were successfully carried out elsewhere. And that's been the case for a number of years, despite the important efforts by organisations such as Transparency International Australia, and I'm aware that a representative of theirs is testifying in front of you later today. But I think that that is an area where still greater resolve needs to materialise. And it is, I suppose, indicative to a degree of the lesser focus on this whole swathe of issues related to foreign corruption, related to foreign bribery by Australian companies, which might or might not be strictly within the parameters of the inquiry that you're undertaking, but Australia has been criticised consistently by the OECD Working Group on Bribery for the rather paltry effort in terms of bringing Australian companies to account for bribery overseas. And we also haven't seen much by way of sanctions enforcement in this country, despite some tentative first steps. Recently, literally a couple of weeks ago, there was the first of its nature referral by the Australian Sanctions Office to the Australian Federal Police in relation to potential sanctions violations in Australia under Iranian sanctions, but we have not seen a track record of enforcement comparable to with what one might observe in other places around the world that have serious sanctions regimes. And so the Australian story so far is tough on organised crime, especially homegrown organised crime, perhaps not so tough on proceeds of foreign crimes that enter the Australian economy, especially as relates to corruption. And so I was hoping that some of those initial framing remarks might be helpful in steering some of the questions that you and your colleagues might wish to ask. And I look forward to discussing these issues in greater depth.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to go to your submission, and you highlighted that the AML CTF scheme does not regulate businesses without a permanent Australian base. Why do you think this should be addressed, and are the jurisdictional impediments to this approach?
Yes, it is a difficult policy dilemma. I think one area where it becomes of concern is the operations of cryptocurrency businesses with a customer base in Australia. Australia and especially Austrac have been world leading in addressing some of the threats presented by cryptocurrency. Austrac regulates cryptocurrency exchanges in Australia. That regulation is now being extended further as part of the Tranche 2 reforms to capture ever more forms of cryptocurrency business models. But it is all subject to that limitation of those organisations need to have essentially a physical presence, a permanent establishment in Australia to come within the Australian regulatory ambit. This does not tend to present problems in the world of brick and mortar banks, where you have to go to your local bank to do business with them, but you can do business with a cryptocurrency exchange that has no Australian presence whatsoever, and in some circumstances they might have a substantial Australian customer base. I say might because I'm not privy to the details that, for example, Austrac would no doubt hold. I hope they would hold on the number of foreign cryptocurrency exchanges that offer services in Australia to customers here without being regulated in this country. So that physical limitation can be a constraint on the regulatory powers of Austrac to go and effectively tell cryptocurrency exchanges who wish to do business in Australia what they need to be doing. The reason why I think it's a complex policy dilemma is that you can notionally cast your regulation in very broad terms, but how in practice are you going to regulate an exchange that's based in Curaçao or Gibraltar or another country around the world? There are different ways in which countries try to tackle that problem. International collaboration is part of that, building relationships with overseas regulators. In some cases, one might resort to targeted financial sanctions against non-compliant exchanges and effectively tell Australian banks don't do business with those exchanges, they're no good. But I think that the Australian position as it stands, at the very least, should be examined to understand the full implications of that and see whether or not that creates a blind spot that might constitute a problem.
Yes, thank you for that. Very helpful evidence for us. You also made comment about other countries who had issues with beneficial ownership registers. Are you able to give us some evidence and talk us through that issue from your perspective? Please?
Yes. I think the issue of beneficial ownership transparency has rightly been top of the agenda for many campaigners and policymakers in Australia and internationally. The idea is very appealing and sound. You need to know who owns what in order to investigate financial crimes. But the challenge with any beneficial ownership register is how do you get the data that it is populated with? One approach that is commonly used is you require companies to self-report. So if I set up a company, that company needs to tell the government that I'm the beneficial owner. The obvious challenge is that if I am criminally minded and I want to obscure my ownership of the company will simply lie. And it might be a blatant lie. They might invent someone who does not even exist, is not a real person, and enter those details on the register. It might be a subtler lie. It might be, for example, a nominee owner who holds the shares of a company because I paid them to do so, whereas I, in reality, retain full economic control over the operations of that company. And so one of the issues that I think are really important in this discussion is before we or rather not before, but in any conversation of beneficial ownership disclosure, it's important to bring that issue of verification and try to understand what the plan is to ensure that it's not a situation of garbage in, garbage out. There are countries around the world that have enthusiastically embraced the idea of beneficial ownership registers, in some cases made them publicly available, but they have not done a good job of verifying the data. The United Kingdom is, I think, a salutary example. When they rolled out their register, there were all sorts of records there that were clearly and patently incorrect. Names of celebrities, names of dead people, just rubbish references to Alibaba and the 40 thieves being entered instead of real beneficial owners of companies. Over time, the UK tried to fix that by cross-referencing information on registers with other databases. So, for example, if a dead person is registered, that will be weeded out. If a 3-year-old is registered as a director of a company, that will be weeded out. So that deals with the more brazen subset of incorrect information being provided. It doesn't deal with the more subtle instances of someone using their friend, a family member, or someone whom they paid to be a proxy owner. So I think that the challenge of verification has not been fully resolved anywhere around the world, but it is important that as Australia rolls out its beneficial ownership registry plans, it really draws on that experience of other countries and talks to places like the UK, but also countries around Europe who've had that experience, and says, well, what has your pathway been? Where are you now in your journey when it comes to verification? What's your best practice? I think realistically there will still be a degree of false information that can't be detected, but it's important to do as much as one can to get it as right as is humanly possible.
So when obviously the UK seems to have taken a lead on this. When you talk about European countries, can you name some of those countries?
All European member states were obliged to have publicly available registers until a couple of years ago, when that was changed as a result of a judgment by the European Court of Justice. But literally every single country around the European Union would have a centralized register of beneficial ownership, and therefore they will have had some experience with how they populate that register. If I were to identify some of the more obvious comparators, I would look for major financial centers that have had significant business activity reflected in their registers. The Netherlands would be an obvious country to consider. Luxembourg, I think, would be another useful comparator jurisdiction. And Luxembourg is both a financial center, but also it's been the target of attention by investigative journalists who downloaded some of the information from their register and were able to find anomalies that the people running the register were not actually able to weed out. So journalists were able to identify examples of false information being submitted. I think Luxembourg would be another country to consider, and potentially France or Germany. But I think that comparative selection would be really useful. And given the amount of effort that is involved in setting up a beneficial ownership register, I think that that sort of study of other countries' experience would be money and time well spent.
It's good. I had the good fortune to go to Norway last year for a very, very short trip, and all these issues are the same. The advantage that they have is the smaller countries. So in some aspects, I think they were further ahead of Australia, but still they look to us, and that collaboration internationally, I think, is really important. So identifying those key people to look at and see what they've done, what success they've had, and how we can actually implement and apply those here, I think would be very good. Are you able to unpack the importance of verification for the benefit of ownership registers in terms of how this might work here in Australia? And as you said, as we going forward to establish a register, we should be looking to other countries. But again, when I talk to people internationally and I talk to people here, is that they focus on businesses that are here in Australia, realising that there are no borders and that they've got limited resources. So as much as they may want to, follow the trail, because I think for people who investigate, this must be very stimulating and challenging to be able to track how this money is moved around. So what's your message then to the committee as to the priorities that we should be making going forward in this area?
My understanding is that Treasury leads on the development of the registry, and one question to ask them would be how they envision their role as the custodian of that registry, and is it going to be only a passive role if we get the information that is submitted and we make it available to whoever has the right to access it? Or is there going to be a function of verifying that information and potentially carrying out some risk-based investigations where, let's imagine, a team of people sitting within Treasury allocated to the running of the registry who do some scanning of patterns in the information submitted, identify potential instances of criminality or cases that are simply worth following up to see that the information is correct. I think that conceptually and in terms of the architecture is a very important question to consider, because if one doesn't get it right immediately, and I favour a more proactive approach, then one will end up in a situation where a couple of years down the line, one will go back to Treasury and say, hey, there are all those problems with the registry, how can it be fixed? And the first answer will be, well, actually, it's not quite our role to do it because we are the repository of the information. We don't have any powers beyond that. I think it would be quite important to ensure that they do have the right powers from the get-go. So some form of risk-based proactive investigations would be useful. There are people in the open source investigations community who just go onto websites such as Companies House website in the UK and identify patterns of anomalies just from looking at that information, downloading spreadsheets, seeing that people from a particular jurisdiction have incorporated 1,000 companies within the same 24 hours. That is suspicious and something that's worth following up on. And so I think it would be important that there be someone in the Australian government who carries out that function of policing the integrity of the register. In terms of the more technical solutions, I think an obvious first step would be cross-checking information that's submitted with other databases. And that, again, will weed out some of the more obvious falsehoods. So people who are deceased, people who are too young, people who are otherwise clearly incapable of being directors, owners, and so on. But I think that will not really, that will not be a substitute for some form of proactive investigations.
How important will the use of AI be in moving forward in terms of tackling these issues and helping law enforcement and other agencies in combating this money laundering?
it's very important. I don't think that we have a clear sense of just what is being done in this area. Over the past 5 or 6 years, there have been many discussions of using machine learning to identify anomalies and then following up on those anomalies, and that can have application across all levels of the anti-money laundering regime. If you're a bank, you might want to identify anomalies in your customer base. If you're AUSTRAC, you might want to use that to identify patterns that you wish to investigate. And indeed, in other contexts, such as corporate registries, again, you might want to draw on the potential of machine learning to see where you need to follow up. But beyond this very basic summary that I've just outlined, I don't think that we have in the public domain a great sense of where collectively the global anti-money laundering community stands on the use of artificial intelligence. I think also that over the past 2 years or so, the previously current focus on machine learning has been somewhat eclipsed by generative AI, and the applications of generative AI in the domain of AML CTF are perhaps less obvious because they have to do with generating text and generating content rather than identifying patterns. But I think that, again, it is an area that might be very fruitfully explored with people like AUSTRAC to understand what they're doing and also, importantly, to what extent they're aware and drawing on international experiences with other comparable agencies who no doubt are thinking about AI in financial crime.
Thank you very much. As you said, though, it isn't just what's happening here in Australia, it's also our Pacific neighbours. What more can Australia do in terms of educating our neighbours and collaborating with them to protect Australians?
Well, I think Australia is playing a very important role as the seat of the Secretariat for the Asia-Pacific Group on Money Laundering, the regional grouping that is carrying out all those activities, capacity building, regional risk assessments, work across mutual evaluations together with the Financial Action Task Force. So not being personally involved in those efforts, it's somewhat difficult for me to judge what obvious areas for improvement would be. I think that as far as I'm able to judge, that work is productive and is very important. Australia has rightly positioned itself as a leader regionally when it comes to AML CTF. I think that another important component, though, would be just to ensure that Australia also walks the walk when it comes to collaborating with law enforcement agencies of those nations, especially when it comes to, again, going back to that issue of proceeds of crimes from Pacific nations coming into Australia, ensuring that those nations are feeling the willingness of the Australian law enforcement community to support their work, respond proactively, respond quickly, and ensure that it's not just a teacher-student relationship, but also an equal law enforcement to law enforcement relationship in addition to that.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else that you wanted to put forward to the committee as that we haven't covered in my questions that you see as really important as taking that next step?
The only other contextual thing I would mention is that in most discussions of the anti-money laundering regime, the question of effectiveness and measurement comes up, and sometimes it leads to sort of paralysis by analysis, where in reality we just don't know what the amounts involved are. But all proceeds of crime generated in Australia need to be laundered by their nature, and there is also an unhealthy proportion of foreign proceeds that no doubt flow to Australia precisely because of its regional role as an attractive place to invest the proceeds. And so even though one might struggle to quantify that, and questions around effectiveness are always difficult to answer, I think we need to be absolutely clear that it is an absolute priority, it should be an absolute priority for Australian law enforcement agencies to tackle financial crime it does have ripple effects across all areas of predicate offences, from corruption to cybercrime to human trafficking and so on. And so the importance of handling that cannot really be overstated, despite the fact that we are operating with a very incomplete evidence base that's simply a reflection of those activities being serious criminal activities that are hidden by their nature.
There is, in terms of the inquiries about the capabilities of law enforcement to respond to money laundering and financial crime, and with organised crime, whether it's money laundering, drugs, firearms, human trafficking, whatever, there is so much happening out there. For your knowledge, do you think they currently have the capacity and capabilities that they need to tackle crimes such as money laundering?
I think it's a difficult question to answer, partly because I feel that there is also an important aspect of prioritising different categories of predicate offences. So let's say hypothetically the AFP focused entirely on disrupting money laundering operations related to outlaw motorcycle gangs. That is a very sensible approach. It's not a bad one, but it would inevitably lead to the exclusion of other areas of concern. Your foreign corruption, your cybercrime, your fraud, your sanctions evasion. And so I think that one of the issues that are worth pursuing with law enforcement agencies is, where does your prioritization lie? How do you ensure that you're covering the spectrum of the things you need to cover? And what are the reforms, if any, that can help you do it better? For example, going back to foreign corruption, I wonder if there is some merit in having a dedicated anti-foreign corruption, anti-kleptocracy unit in the AFP along the same lines as there is in the UK, or indeed they used to be in the US until recent changes under the current administration. I wonder also if there is some benefit in having a sanctions evasion dedicated team within the AFP, given the rising stature of sanctions as a very important tool of Australian foreign policy. But of course, there is a genuine trade-off there, because 3 more people working on sanctions evasion might mean 3 less people working on bikies and financial flows related to that. But I think it's an area where a serious conversation is always useful.
I ask then, in relation to what you teach at university, the popular courses, is there a lot of interest being generated? As our first witnesses said, there's a lot more collaboration between universities in research and law enforcement, and that there's a lot of interest in the courses at Griffin University. Is that the same at the National University?
Yes. It is a new area. So I've been at ANU for 4 years, and since the time I joined, I've been teaching transnational anti-corruption laws, and then I developed the financial crime law course. So last year we had a total enrollment of 100 students across both courses, which is a healthy number, but I think that we remain, alongside Griffith and La Trobe and Macquarie and Sydney, among the few Australian universities that are setting up those courses. And one way that I always try to make the case for more attention on this is, if you go to any law school around the world, you will find a course on international criminal law. But thankfully, notwithstanding the importance of that area, it's relatively few countries where a genocide or war crimes are actually happening. But financial crime occurs in every country around the world. There are billions that banks spend on financial crime compliance, yet it is a relatively small proportion of universities globally that offer those courses. So I hope that that will change. I also think there is a greater recognition in academia of the importance of this area of inquiry. Together with a couple of collaborators, I was fortunate to get a grant from the Australian Research Council recently to study the effectiveness of sanctions implementation, which I think is again an indication of the support that the government and the academic community is now willing to provide for studying those matters.
That's great. Really appreciate your evidence and your time that you've given us today, and I hope that does become a far more interest in studying this, because we need people with the skills and the expertise and the desire to want to work on the good team to prevent this. So thank you again very much. Really valued your evidence today.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I now welcome representatives from Customs Advisory. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to parliamentary committees has been provided to you for the Hansard record. Would you please state your full names and capacity in which you appear today, and then I'll invite you to make an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chair. My name is Crispin from Customs Advisory. I'm the Director of the business.
Thank you very much. Have you got an opening statement or some comments that you would like to lead with?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to appear today. This inquiry addresses a core national security challenge, whether Australia's law enforcement agencies have the capability, powers and technology to effectively combat money laundering and financial crime. I'll provide the global context. 2 days ago, 15 November, is the International Day Against Transnational Organized Crime. This day was commemorated in Vienna in the United Nations. The 2025 theme is Follow the Money. It captures the essence of effective disruption. Financial crime is not victimless. It fuels drug trafficking, modern slavery, trap terrorism and corruption, and undermines public trust. Criminal groups exploit global systems to move billions, and our frameworks must keep pace. I'd like to recognize the legacy of Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. They were the pioneers to transform the fight against organized crime by targeting its financial base. Their work on the Maxi trial reshaped global anti-money laundering practice. The assassination of the two magistrates in 1992 reminds us of the courage needed to confront powerful criminal networks. Their message endures: follow the money. The task before us is clear. We cannot be complacent. We must ensure law enforcement is properly resourced, empowered, and equipped to close loopholes and disrupt illicit financial flows. I trust my submission will assist the committee, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the committee's benefit, can you just explain what your company does and the nature of the businesses who are your clients in this area?
Most of my clients are fund managers or managers that manage investment schemes. I run an independent advisory practice assisting regulated entities or reporting entities to manage their anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing compliance, and also other non-financial services industries to manage both their AML obligations as well as their sanctions compliance in Australia.
So, what are the main issues that your clients are experiencing in this area of financial crime?
A lot of the work that are coming in from large global financial institutions where there are a lot of managed funds are coming from investors from Australia and different parts of the world. One of the challenges is to be able to conduct the required enhanced due diligence to manage and determine whether they have a degree of risk that relates to money laundering, terrorism financing, sanctions, or proliferation finance. And one of the key things relates to the source of wealth and source of funds.
So Can you identify any emerging risks that and trends that you're seeing, both happening in Australia and also globally?
I think there is I guess I can start by saying Australia is a very attractive location for financial services. It is a hub for major, big, large institutions. 13 global banks from around the world are based here. They have a subsidiary. They have managing directors or a hub that is located out in Hong Kong or Singapore. And the challenge relates to the flow of funds, unexplained wealth, things to do with the trend that relates to say, for example, there could be investments that are coming in from different beneficial owners where you're not able to drill down to the natural person. Some of the trust structures that are available facing organizations in managed funds relates to a circular trust, for example, or trusts that are not being able to verify. There could be information that needs to be re-verified because they were onboarded 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And there is also pushback. Australia is also known to be, trying to be commercially savvy and focus on delivering the right service, providing a delightful customer experience, managing legitimate, wealthy individuals to manage their wealth, but at the same time asking specific questions. If they have nothing to hide, they will be able to provide those answers and also provide proof of those answers that they have given. So it's not just about being able to, fill in a form and populate those sections, but also to provide supporting documents as a way to verify. And some of the other challenges relates to the details that relates to the beneficial owners. So say, for example, my future grandson or my future great-grandson that doesn't exist, and who is controlling, who has the power to exercise that authority and trustees. A lot of the gatekeepers, such as the lawyers and accountants, are encouraging people to set up trusts as opposed to a PTY LTD structure. So there's all these concerns that relates to practitioners like myself and the people that are in AML compliance and also trying to do the right thing, asking the right questions. Doesn't matter if you are the frontline person as a sales and business development, or whether you are working in the second line of defense where you are giving input or giving advice to the frontline people. How do you give them the right questions or equip them in the right way, raise awareness, and understand that there is something more beyond this, on top of their ongoing relationship as a relationship manager with that customer.
So in terms of your international experience with various regimes that have been addressing the anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing, what countries would you direct us to look at and for Australia to look at? And why would you identify them? What are they doing that we can learn from, that stand out from your perspective?
Thank you for your question, Chair. So I think there's a lot of merits in looking at some of the other jurisdictions from the region, say, for example, in Singapore and in Hong Kong. The Monetary Authority of Singapore has provided or created a platform called Cosmic. It is a privacy-enhancing technology-driven platform to encourage public-private partnership, sharing of information in a trusted ecosystem, being able to use that information on a tactical basis. So basically giving law enforcement agencies with access, as well as the financial intelligence unit, to be able to use them from a wider range perspective. So submissions given by different banks and financial services, the law enforcement agencies have the overall umbrella overview, and being able to map it, have that visualization using graph technology to be able to map and trace and follow the money. That encourages people to make it easier for a request to do a search warrant and, freeze them and respond in a tactical way. So the agility and the borderless nature of transnational organized crime really requires us to take on that, or have the courage to take on that approach to make it very seamless, to really make life easier for the law enforcement person.
So do you see that there are any deficiencies in Australia's anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing regime from your perspective? Can you identify any of those deficiencies or give us an example of that?
You're talking about current or future state of efficiencies?
Where we are currently now.
At the moment, we do have, let's just say, for example, we do have a national scam center. We do have a response by cyber.gov. We do have ability to stop scams from happening and cyber-enabled fraud. We do have TSOC in Australia, transnational and serious organized crime group that's driven by all the major law enforcement agencies. We also have the JPC3 agency that are working together hand in hand. There are a lot of success stories that are coming out from the current work. But in my submission, I'm proposing to really industrialize the intelligence through a technology-enabled cross-border privacy-preserving information platform. It sounds like a dream, but I am, including some international precedents to support my submission that includes the gain that they have in, having a structured platforms such as the Singapore COSMIC platform. The European Union has a anti-money laundering act model. There is also the publication by the private sector of the Wolfsburg Group, which is a composition of the 13 global banks around the world. There is also the updates that are given by the GCFFC, which is a coalition of financial crime. So I think if you think about that, we want to use technology as a force multiplier. We want to be able to target the core vulnerability. We want to enable legislative reforms to help with the how, focus on the how, and with the intent and all that. Without all those components, law enforcement would remain several steps behind the agility of the criminal syndicates.
Thank you. Have you been able to identify any structural gaps which are currently being exploited by criminals? And if so, can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for your question. So I believe the core problem is a structural mismatch between Australia's 20th century law enforcement architecture and the realities of the 21st century globalized crime. So there are three issues that are driving the gap. We have a fragmented law and institutions. So say, for example, some of the frameworks are outdated, notably the Australian Crime Commissions Act 2002 that creates the overlapping mandates, the entrenched silos across the ACIC, AFP, and the Home Affairs. The independent review of the ACIC, as well as the 2024 Independent Intelligence Review, they both show that these legacy structures impede a seamless intelligence sharing and coordinated operation because we are trying to deal with borderless criminal networks. There is also a mismatch between the capabilities and the powers. So what I mean by that is the agencies are expected to conduct proactive intelligence work, but they're equipped with powers that are geared towards prosecution, focused investigation, and the cohesive powers often would require a formal investigation. And that threshold might be too high for early stage threat discovery. So this limits the proactive and the preemptive disruption, which is an issue that's been repeatedly flagged in national security reviews. And then the third thing I can think of is the not having a unified national strategy. So what I mean by that is that we do have existing task force, we do have committees, they are tactical and reactive. My understanding is there's no single body that has the mandate and authority or resources to drive a genuinely national strategic response to serious and organized crime. There is an independent review of the ACIC in 2024, and the report was raising concerns about the ACIC board for its procedural focus and the broader governance landscape that lacks a clear hierarchy and accountability. So yes, despite having capable personnel, the system itself is not fit for purpose. It's built for a different era. It constrains Australia's ability to deter, detect, and disrupt the sophisticated network of transnational organized crime that is, targeting Australia's economy and national security.
So could you outline for the committee's benefit the steps and the structure that needs to be put into place to modernise and to be able to address this global crime, which is only ever going to increase?
Thank you, Chair, for your question. In my submission, I advocate from shifting from measuring activity to measuring effectiveness. So what I mean by that is to shift from activity-based matrix to genuine outcomes. So, and that could be, three key things. Number one, having an outcome-oriented measure of success. So moving beyond counting suspicious reports or operational outputs to matrix that reflect real impact. So asset recovery is one of those things, the value and the volume to frozen assets that are seized and confiscated. There could be the network disruption of criminal transnational organized crime. So dismantling syndicates and facilitators are being prosecuted and having the criminal capability reduced. There is the harm reduction. So measuring against, say, for example, a financial crime harm index to show the reduction of social and economic damage to the country. Having the intelligence utility, say, converting the financial intelligence into investigation and successful action. The second thing I can think of is having a national performance accountability framework. So having a unified system that links agency activities to national outcome. This will include like a national change to show how tactical works to drive the strategic impact, having KPIs across the ACIC, AFP, Austrac, and others with public reporting, having an independent review to ensure the framework remains adaptive and aligned to the evolving threats. And then I mentioned earlier, which is a key point of my submission, is to industrialize the intelligence through technology and collaboration. So having an outcome-based measurement, strengthening public-private partnership, building on what we already have that are really good at the moment, which is the FinTel Alliance, as well as considering the COSMIC model from Singapore that is driven under the central bank MAS. Having advanced analytics to shift from rule-based monitoring to proactive network detection, and have the data system to be interoperate to be able to break down the silos and support that near real-time insights across the jurisdiction as well as the industry. So I think this will give you the evidence approach to measuring the impact and strengthening the ability to combat financial crime.
Do you think currently that law enforcement have the capability and the resourcing to be able to take that next step and set up that framework?
I guess it's yes and no. It depends on how you look at it and at what time frame and what focus. Because Chair, I'll use an example. So when I was working as head of compliance for a managed fund service provider, I have had a client that lost some money through the account takeover. So their account was taken over by someone outside the system, and the loss was $500. I'm not sure if you've made a police phone call in your life, but when I make a call, I would speak to the person on the phone and say, we have a client who lost money. I need to file a police report, and they say that we'll come to you. And it took probably the 2 or 3 days before they came because it's just $500. On a different occasion, when I have a client who had a loss of $50,000 worth, they came within the hour. So I think it's about the prioritization and the urgency as well as the resourcing for law enforcement. I think it would be a great idea to have legislative reform to clarify the mandates and the powers that are given to law enforcement. I mentioned earlier about the Australian Crime Commissions Act of 2002. I think we can progress legislation that defines ACIC as a dedicated criminal intelligence agency, for example. We can have the technology uplift, as I mentioned, having a national federated data analytics platform. We can have stronger international partnership. I think all those exist. We just want to deepen it and really make it very solid. And there are some wins that are happening recently with our neighboring countries in the Pacific Islands, and that's really good. And really working hand in hand with, say, for example, Interpol, Europol, some of the larger agencies out there, in addition to what we already have with OECD and the World Bank and the IMF. So really working closer to the activity itself, and that relates to transnational organized crime groups.
Great, thank you very much. If there was one last message that you want to leave with the committee for someone who has so much experience in this area and identified, where we need to improve, and I think it's fair to say since I've been on this committee, the collaboration between law enforcement and jurisdictions, to be able to see that improve to such an extent that it has been amazing. But we still have so much to do. So what's your message to this committee in terms of this is our opportunity to lay down some recommendations? So you've got the floor to be able to put that on the public record. What do we need to do, and what do we need to invest in law enforcement to ensure they've got the capabilities to meet these international global challenges that we're all facing?
Thank you, Chair.
Just an easy question. An easy question for
you. I guess, there are a lot of submissions that were made before today. There was the submissions made in the 47th and now the 48th, and I've studied them. Some of the stuff are similar to each other, and my submission is really about a proposed roadmap that is evidence-based, based on international precedents and grounded on the international bodies like the Financial Action Task Force, the Egmont Group, which is the central body for the Financial Intelligence Unit. I would say, finish the job for Tranche 2, get it done, improve trust transparency, apply or provide practical guidance going forward and timing. So having a accountability around it, making sure that we have ability to identify the natural person, who that big boss is or who is a high net worth person, whether that person is legitimate or not, and whether it is reasonable. So I think if we are trying to deliver a great, delightful customer experience and align with trying to manage the risk, we need to have an ability to ask the right questions at the right timing. So little technologies will help, like the nudging and the follow-ups and so on, to get down to the beneficial owners. I think it'd be a good idea to launch a COSMIC-style PPP or public-private partnership platform that is privacy enhanced with technology and good governance. I think we can shift from, I mentioned earlier, from monitoring to effectiveness. So using explainable machine learning or explainable AI, looking at entity resolution, looking at graph analytics to make life easier for the practitioners in law enforcement as well as people in reporting entities. We want to make sure that beneficial ownership data are structured and verified across and usable. So it's not just about having the information that is on paper, but we want to have the right fields and have the right formatting and have the right string of words, whether it's like alphabets or numbers and characters. You might have people from different cultures with, people that doesn't have a first name or people that doesn't have a last name or have, 15 characters as surname. So we want to think about the ability to interoperate the data and having a standard data such as the BODS. Maybe standing up the trade-based money laundering fusion cell that I proposed in my submission, tightening the controls for proliferation finance and sanctions evasion, reducing the loss and the time to freeze. So things to do with having a 24/7 scam center, which we already have, but really having more resources to almost have a digital fire brigade where you can stop the loss. So really the time to freeze matters. So almost having a matrix to measure what is the time to freeze. Think about the capital markets, the international financial markets. Criminals are now more sophisticated. They are not just using, they're not just targeting individuals and consumers and moms and dad. They are going into the financial markets. So considering those things, having published outcomes, say the KPIs, reporting transparently on a regular cadence, governing with privacy and fairness, having the legal robustness to at its core. So those are the things that I hope we can achieve within the next 12, 24, 36 months.
Thank you very much for that and for your submission. I appreciate you giving up your time today. Very grateful for your evidence Thank you very much. We will now adjourn until 4:10. No?
Thank you, Chair. And committee members, if I can be of further assistance to the committee, please don't hesitate to contact me.
No, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. We'll stand adjourned to 4:20. Sorry. Good afternoon. I now welcome the representatives from the Real Estate Institute of Australia. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to parliamentary committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and capacity in which you appear today, and then I'll give you the opportunity to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. Scott Rollison, the CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Australia.
Welcome again. Have you got an opening statement or some comments to make?
Yeah, that would be great, Chair. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear today on behalf of the Real Estate Institute of Australia. The Real Estate Institute of Australia is the national peak body and voice for the real estate profession in Australia. Our members are made up of state and territory real estate institutes. Real estate agencies will become reporting entities under the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regime as part of Tranche 2 from 1 July next year. I acknowledge in July this year the committee re-referred this inquiry and amended the terms of reference to remove previous inclusions which related to the Tranche 2 reforms. However, as over 14,000 real estate agencies will play a part in combating anti-money laundering come July, I feel it prudent to remain engaged with this inquiry, in particular the term of reference E, the role and response of businesses and other private sector organisations, including their level of awareness, assistance to law enforcement and initiatives to counter this crime. Over the past 12 months, we've committed to working closely with AUSTRAC on the drafting of the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing rules and associated regulator guidance. AUSTRAC are to be commended for their work to date in the development of the Tranche 2 regulatory framework that will sit under the Governing Act, while simultaneously preparing 90,000 additional reporting entities. For the successful rollout of Tranche 2 reforms and to ensure the best law enforcement outcomes, AUSTRAC and the Department of Home Affairs need to ensure that increasing industry and consumers' level of awareness of the incoming obligations remain a priority in the lead up to 1 July 2026. For the real estate industry, this is critical. In line with FATF Recommendation 2022, the Governing Act will require real estate agents to undertake customary due diligence on both the seller and buyer. The requirement to undertake CDD on the counterparty poses a challenge as there is no direct commercial agreement, for example, between the selling agent and buyer. In turn, there are minimal levers to compel buyer CDD. This is compounded by a perceived low trust within the profession and that the buyer may have already completed CDD with up to 3 reporting entities across the residential transaction prior. As such, the real estate sector has concerns regarding wider consumer engagement and willingness to comply with their AML/CTF obligations along the real estate transaction. We have commenced work on a consumer awareness campaign in collaboration with real estate portals, targeting individuals who are looking to buy or sell a house, and a separate industry awareness campaign to encourage real estate agencies to enrol with AUSTRAC come 31 March. However, we need AUSTRAC to support this work with measures such as an Australian Government microsite with industry-specific information for consumers and Australian Government branded collateral for use. The buyer CDD completion risk can also be mitigated through Section 633 of the rules, which allows real estate agencies to rely on parts of CDD conducted by other reporting entities under certain circumstances. This is a positive step by AUSTRAC to minimise the number of times consumers will be engaging in the CDD processes. The transition from regulation to guidance and implementation is critical. AUSTRAC will need to provide sufficient and clear guidance to ensure both real estate agencies and other reporting entities are comfortable to adopt this provision. We look forward to working closely with AUSTRAC and our state and territory institutes on the development of regulator guidance, industry awareness and education, and consumer awareness. Finally, I'd like to commend the state and territory real estate institutes for their commitment and dedication to date in preparing the industry to be the new front line to fight in the fight against anti-money laundering in Australia. We have a lot to do collectively in the coming year.
Thank you very much for those comments. I might kick off with some questions if I can. And first off, just thank you for your submission and the fact that you made yourself available today. This is a very important inquiry. Are you able to provide some context about the extent of money laundering in the real estate sector?
Yeah, so tomorrow's witnesses will probably provide a bit more detail, but one of the stats that continue to be rolled out is around the AFP-led Criminal Assets Confirmation Task Force restraining 110 million in 2024, and then across those 5 years between 2020 to 2024, 1.2 billion, and 65% of all those restraints are real estate. So whilst it is a drop in the water of the 11.5 trillion property industry, there is obviously a significant element of real estate involved.
So how's the industry addressing these risks?
Currently,
yes.
As they're not sort of tranche to reporting entities, currently the risks generally are at the business. Would be from a day-to-day perspective, there wouldn't be additional requirements under AML obligations. However, different states and territory regulations have aspects that sort of complement the incoming reforms, be it VOI, verification of identity, and trust accounting requirements and such. So in the day-to-day business and regulation at that state and territory level, there would be complementary regulations that will complement the incoming obligations.
Would it be useful to your industry to have uniform state laws so that agents who move between states are then well aware of their reporting requirements? Would that be of help to the sector?
It's interesting. The harmonisation of laws in a federation can be very helpful, and certainly there is an appetite around, certainly in the regulation space of real estate licensing, to have that harmonisation. I think with the introduction of AMR this year, automatic mutual recognition this year, it has posed some significant gaps between jurisdictions and the differing regulations. So certainly that would go a long way to solving that issue. Whether there's the appetite at the state and territory governments is another question. But yes, certainly at our end we're seeing it, and we've actually just started a project with Build Skills, the Jobs and Skills Council, around looking at the impacts of AMR on the real estate profession because of the discrepancies in licensing arrangements amongst the jurisdictions.
So how's the industry preparing for Trench 2 reforms, and do you believe that the industry is ready?
Yeah, it's a tough one. That's a tough question. I think obviously really guided by AUSTRAC and the guidance that they've been releasing. But in the interim, particularly the state and territory real estate institutes, all have commenced doing webinars to start really socialising the basic principles of AML. I do believe that there's still a long way to go from sector-specific guidance, which AUSTRAC is planning to release in January. I think that will be the key to really be clear and consistent with that, and focus on the sector itself. I think there's probably a level of, the lawyers and accountants, that the guidance for them is not going to be as useful for the real estate industry, and definitely really acknowledging that our frontline staff have a lower barrier of entry. So our real estate agent generally has a Cert 4, whereas if you're looking at the frontline AML staff of lawyers and accountants, generally that's a grad diploma at the very least to be to sit in those roles. So it's certainly there's an inherent knowledge gap, and there's a need to really target that education and awareness to be appropriate to the audience.
So does that fall to your organisation and the state institutes to run that education program? Because as you said, there's a lot of agents out there, and there's a lot that would, in some cases, maybe be resistant to change, not because they're doing anything illegal, just that it's very complicated and they see it as another burden? Yeah,
I think for us, the institutes see it as part of their role as being industry peak associations. However, any support from the government and AUSTRAC to deliver on that is certainly something that we've been pushing, and currently I have a proposal before AUSTRAC around just bridging that gap between that technical to our frontline real estate agents, around assisting with some co-funding to get a national project up to deliver some really targeted education material right to the front line that's talking directly to those real estate agents, opposed to, say, the AML compliance officer.
Well, it's going to be important to write it in language that is going to be easily retained and understood, their obligations. So that ongoing relationship that you've obviously developed with AUSTRAC, is that now, how far away are they from actually coming to the table with some good targeted strategy for educating real estate agents?
Yeah, so currently in discussions with AUSTRAC around that. So certainly we expect obviously the sector-specific guidance, which will be the starter packs out in January. From an education awareness training piece, really waiting on the outcome of the current discussions around a potential funding partnership to deliver this training. And I think, as you mentioned, Chair, that it's really key to get that information right for that. Obviously, there's 70,000 real estate agents at that front line, and to get the communication of their role, which is certainly not the full gambit of the whole, say, a role of an AML officer. Their intersection is directly with the front line, with the clients, and really talking through exactly how to have practical conversations. Why as well is very important. Why are we doing this to support the fight against anti-money laundering and the impacts of money laundering on things like human exploitation, child trafficking. So really telling that story as well, and then just some really practical hints around the real tough conversations you'll have with, say, the buyer who we don't have a commercial agreement with from a selling agent perspective.
What's the discussions been around in relation to that issue? That sure, you're the seller, but you don't have that same reach to a buyer. So what's been the dialogue with AUSTRAC and others in relation to addressing your concerns there?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been constructive. I think what is quite a restrictive international standard that directly, explicitly states that the customer is both the buyer and the seller, and then also quite a tight governing act around that piece. The rules itself have created a number of particular powers that could be used to assist in reliance. However, probably for me, in the recent draft of the sector-specific packs, it was neglected, this concept that there needs to be some guidance around, well, if you take all your reasonable precautions and due diligence to undertake CDD and you have a difficult buyer, what are your protections under the Act so you're not contravening the Act? So really outline that in guidance. So that's sort of one thing that I continue to have discussions with AUSTRAC. A real positive is, under Section 633 of the rules itself, they've embedded a quasi sort of reliance power, which really should promote the ability to rely on the buyer's conveyance's CDD process. You'd still have to collect initial information, do a risk assessment of the customer, but you'll be able to rely on certain aspects of the conveyance's CDD, which I think will really be helpful, particularly in the complex cases where you've got a company or a trust and there's multiple beneficiaries. I think that will be very helpful in assisting the agents. But again, for us, that's probably the big gap in guidance, is how are we going to deal with that buyer CDD when we don't have a commercial agreement in place. Other jurisdictions such as New Zealand, they don't actually require buyer CDD on their under their regime, and interestingly enough, a lot of their suspicious activity reports are still very high on the buyer side, even though the fact that they're not doing that CDD on the buyer. So still achieving good regulatory outcomes. But unfortunately, the FATF recommendation 22 is pretty explicit that buyer CDD is required.
So in the discussions that you've had, has there been any discussions around a public awareness campaign, so that people, any campaign you run you target all audience, you don't hit all of them, but was there been any discussions at all, particularly, it's different when you go to an accountant or a lawyer, but when you go to buy a home, that people have some awareness of these changes?
Yeah, there's some initial discussions with AUSTRAC, and I understand there are plans, but obviously they've got quite a big job at the moment, and that they're focusing on the guidance and industry engagement. We've engaged a number of the portals, real estate advertising portals, to start planning out an industry engagement, but also a consumer awareness campaign. And probably the big ask from AUSTRAC is that they actually have an Australian government branded microsite that directly talks to the relevant obligations for real estate. So if you are having a conversation with a customer, you can then direct them directly to an Australian government branded website, which essentially details the requirements that are put upon real estate agents. That would be very helpful. And then also for us, we're just really chasing that marketing collateral that we can use to push that campaign out, which would be ideal. And that sort of will be great because obviously the real estate portals are where people are looking when they're buying and selling. So we've got a real captive audience, and if we can push that awareness campaign out, that will come sort of June, that would be a good outcome.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So in your submission, you suggested that AUSTRAC should release material for entities to use in their transactions to reduce mistrust between client and agents, which could jeopardise customer due diligence processes. Can you just step us through that a bit more as to why you think that's necessary and whether it will alleviate some of the mistrust in listing agents?
Around sort of marketing collateral, is that yes. What? Yeah, so I think for us, I think with any consumer, there is an inherent sort of low level of trust with the profession. As you would see from the recent Governance Institute Ethics Index, our net score was -22. So it's a challenging base to come from, and I think it's a really, when you're dealing with a huge life-changing transaction, the stress is there. So being able to really demonstrate that the collection of this information is for the purposes of the anti-money laundering regime, which is an Australian government program, that would be very helpful in building that trust and directing it out, that we're just essentially we are the stewards of that regime, opposed to we're not using that information for business purposes and things like that.
There is also in communities, in the real estate business as well, people tend to be able to spot somebody who perhaps isn't as forthcoming when they're trying to sell a property. They'll say anything to sell it. So I'm sure that there would be messaging from your organisation, the State Institutes, to make sure that the obligations are very pointed and targeted towards particularly some people that may need it more than others, to make sure they're compliant.
Yeah, definitely that industry awareness piece is key to get everyone on board. I think we're going to be a very useful profession in the fight. I think our front line is very strong interpersonal skills, strong intuition. Part of the role already is, they're looking at, when the buyers come through the door, they're looking at, can this person afford the property? That sort of experience goes towards source of wealth investigations. I think it's the profession is very, very well placed to assist in fighting that the anti-money laundering.
It's a very key element of combating money laundering and crime in general. So it's great. Is there anything that that you haven't touched on that is of concern still to you with the Trench 2 reforms?
No, I think, Chair, you've covered off through your questioning. I think probably the only piece that I haven't covered is the real need for AUSTRAC and the Australian government to engage the state and territory regulators to really ensure that there isn't duplication amongst the obligations. So, for example, some state and territories require verification of identity on the buyer and seller. That customer due diligence process needs to complement it. It can't be duplicative, and there's really a level of awareness that needs to happen between the governments, because they will be say for example, New South Wales Department of Fair Trading, they will be the ones that receive the complaints around requesting additional information, and they need to be in a place to understand why, to answer that question as well for that consumer.
It's about collaboration, isn't it, and about communication, and perhaps also then looking at a bit more uniformity of the Federation in laws so that everyone knows, doesn't matter where you are, you know what your obligations are, and also consumers know what their obligations are and that there's not the duplication. I think that would be really good step. So if there's anything else that you want to raise, otherwise, I mean, I'm just very happy with the evidence that you've given us, unless there's anything else you wanted to pass on to the committee while you have the opportunity.
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee. Really appreciate your time today. And if there's anything you need, please feel free to reach out. We're really committed to getting industry prepared.
Well, thank you very much for working so collaboratively with AUSTRAC. I mean, it's in all our interests to combat this crime. So thank you very much for your submission and particularly for appearing before us today. Thank you.
Chair. Thank you, committee.
We would just take a short suspension until we get our next witness organised. Thank you. Good afternoon. I now welcome representatives from Transparency International Australia, and I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to parliamentary committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full name and capacity in which you appear before us, and then I will invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of your remarks, myself and committee members may wish to ask you some questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to committee members for inviting Transparency International Australia to attend, and thank you for reading our submission. My name is Russell Wilson. I'm appearing in my personal capacity as a non-executive director of Transparency International Australia. My CEO, Clancy Moore, sends his apologies. He would have appeared, but he's unfortunately travelling, so I am in his place. In terms of just a short statement, I'll just say that our submission was provided in September last year, so it predates the amendments to the AML-CTF Act, which were made early this year. And I commend the government on making those changes. I do note that they passed the Senate by just one vote, so it was close. But nevertheless, they are in place. I guess in terms of ongoing issues, the main thing that I would ask the committee to consider is, in terms of our submission, the need for a public beneficial ownership register. We feel that the amendments to the anti-money laundering legislation, particularly to capture lawyers, accountants, real estate agents and others, were significant and will help in terms of the fight against money laundering. But in order to have their effectiveness, what is really needed is a register that identifies who are the beneficial owners of various assets. And we can, of course, discuss and debate all the rules about what that register should contain and who should have access to it, etc. But that is a very significant further development that does need to occur. I'll be happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate you appearing before us. On behalf of the committee, I'll probably kick off. And the register has been something that we've had other witnesses today speak in relation to the importance of it. And I've asked them, who are the countries, what are they doing, where can we learn from to make sure that the register is as good as it can be in terms of being able to make sure that we identify those key issues, which is going to help break down the money laundering, and in fact it will also help with organised crime. So can you give us some of your experience and where are the countries that you think are doing very well and that we can learn from?
Sure, thank you. Transparency International Australia, in fact, Transparency International generally works by way of a coalition of like-minded people and organisations. and that helps us really to achieve the momentum that's required to be able to advocate for changes. I say that because we do work closely with Dr. Moisenko, who you heard from earlier today, from the Australian National University, and I think he put the answer to that question very well, and I don't think I can add much more to that, particularly in identifying the countries. I agree with what he has said. May I add, though, in regard to, it may have been another issue that another question that you asked him, but he did inform you that Transparency International Australia has been working very closely with the Department of Treasury in regard to this. And we feel that though the government has the best of intentions, the focus of the government has been in regard to the taxation implications of this, and particularly capturing the bigger companies who seek to take their profits offshore and minimise their taxation in Australia. And we don't believe the government is actually quite properly focused on the anti-money laundering side of this and what needs to be done to assist in that respect. Now, we've had Transparency International Australia has had several meetings with Treasury officials in regard to this over, probably goes back a couple of years at least. So we know there's good intention there, but we haven't really seen anything concrete in respect to the anti-money laundering side of this as yet. One of the issues which was pointed out earlier by Dr. Moisenko is the verification of the data. I think everybody agrees that the ASIC register currently contains unverified data and therefore is not of that great use. The issue is, do we seek to verify the data that's on that register at the moment, which would be a considerable undertaking, or do we start anew? I think Treasury's view is generally that we need to start anew, but its idea in respect of verification is based on the model of the onus is on the other party to provide proper information in respect of who the beneficial owner is, and if they are caught out, then they will incur significant penalties. Now, that can, yes, go some of the way towards curing this issue, but not all of the way. We believe that some verification also does need to be undertaken by government in regard to this so that the two meet, that there are appropriate penalties, but there is also some due diligence, some verification done on the part of government in respect of this issue as well, given its importance. And that is probably the better model to go forward with in regard to this, at this stage anyway, short of a better solution.
Thank you for that. You pointed out that AUSTRAC relies on compliance by regulated entities to carry out its regulatory role, noting there's been significant failures of the entities to report suspicious transactions. You argued for change to AUSTRAC's operating model, scope and capacity to address money laundering risks. Can you explain to the committee what sort of changes that you would be looking to see and that are needed?
Well, I think it's been reasonably clear that some of the bigger cases in regard to which AUSTRAC has taken civil penalty action have in fact been through self-reporting. Essentially, organisations coming forward and saying, look, we may have done the wrong thing here. We're not quite sure. We want to check with you. And then things have taken their own course from there. So I think the issue is more that AUSTRAC has relied on these confessions to pick up breaches of the anti-money laundering legislation, particularly the reporting obligations, rather than being proactive and capturing these deficiencies itself. Now, in terms of being able to be proactive and be able to do that, of course, there's an issue of resourcing to be able to properly capture, to be able to properly investigate. But it's not just AUSTRAC's issue in the sense that AUSTRAC gets a lot of data in through these reports. AUSTRAC shares this data with a range of law enforcement agencies, national security agencies, agencies that deal with social security payments, things like that. So it actually has a network both domestically and internationally with it shares information, shares intelligence, and can receive intelligence as well. So in regard to what AUSTRAC does, it should seek to harvest more the benefit of those relationships in order to be able to get intelligence back to it, so that it can also then exercise some of the powers that it has under its own legislation, as well as law enforcement, of course, being able to use that intelligence for its own investigatory purposes as well.
So in terms of the scheme and in terms of AUSTRAC, and you said that there seems to me, as a layperson, some problems here that they rely so much on self-reporting rather than doing that investigation themselves and being able to identify. Is that because there's the scope of issues that they have to contend with is so broad, or is it about not having the expertise, or is it just under-resourcing, or do they need to prioritise where they're putting their limited resources?
Well, you spotted a number of the issues in your question. I should have said in my introduction that I worked for 10 years as AUSTRAC as its first General Counsel between 2006 and 2016, but it's been a little while since I've had any formal association, and I, of course, can't speak for AUSTRAC. But the issues that you mentioned are relevant, but I feel that in terms of being able to identify the issues themselves and being more proactive, AUSTRAC does this to some extent. It uses artificial intelligence to some extent. It uses its IT capabilities, and it does do that to identify red flags in its data, which then can be investigated by other agencies and can be investigated by AUSTRAC itself. Now, there is probably, I can't speak for AUSTRAC, but I suspect that there might be a resourcing issue in how much it can devote to that task and proactively assess and make findings of its own. You could argue that it should be doing that at least in regard to its own legislation, which it administers, and in terms of breaches of its own legislation. And law enforcement can then follow up in terms of the red flags that are relevant to law enforcement investigations. I can't fully answer that question, except that it probably needs to do more to leverage its IT capabilities and more of its other resources in order to be able to do that, where its current priorities may lie elsewhere. It's got to onboard a number of new sectors to the AML-CTF regime, and perhaps this now will take a little bit further amount of time before it settles down and it can reprioritise in a sense.
Thank you for that. I was interested to find out a little bit more when you make reference to the lack of data collection from entities such as retailers of luxury goods. Are you also then including car sales as well as and what would be the benefit? Can you talk through for the benefit of the community why you think that's an issue and what we should be doing about it?
Sure. Well, high-value goods dealers are not currently covered by the new changes that have just come in. Transparency International Australia did argue for the coverage to be more general, not just be dealing with dealers in gemstones and jewellery and things like that. The problem is that money can be laundered by using cash to buy high-value goods. That can be cars, that can be watches, that can be fur coats, that can be any number of high-end items, including art, for example. And this is dealers in these high-value goods will not be caught by the changes to the AML-CTF regime as widely as it should be in order to make the regime more effective. So the purchase of these particular kinds of goods through illicit money can continue to go on without the people involved in this trade, quite legitimately offering these goods for sale, without them having the reporting obligations that currently exist for other regulated entities under the AML-CTF Act.
So, interesting when you talk about art dealers in terms of that, to me would be a pretty obvious one where, money can be laundered quite easily, and, obviously it happens globally, so do luxury goods. What was the response from the agencies around your conversations and suggestions about encapsulating those areas as well in this legislation?
Sure. Well, like others, AUSTRAC put in, I think, several submissions into the inquiry that led to the current changes to the AML-CTF Act. I'm trying to think, but from memory, I don't believe we got any substantive response into why the net was not cast wider in regard to the coverage of luxury goods or high-value goods dealers. Maybe it was thought that one should start with a particular smaller group and to make AUSTRAC's regulatory activities slightly easier to start with and then perhaps expand out later. I'm just not privy to the sort of reasoning and thinking behind that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. You also note that Westpac, Crown and Operation Ironside examples expose weaknesses in Australia's current anti-money laundering regime, and that there should be processes established to enable detection of selective reporting by entities. Are you able to explain that in more detail about how you see selective reporting, the entities that have been in the practice of that, so that we can help eliminate that into the future?
Sure. I can't comment on specific entities, but I can comment in general terms. There are types of reporting that are done by reporting entities that can somewhat skew the picture sometimes. Some entities, in order to, I guess for the sake of greater caution, put in suspicious matter reports on everything, the tiniest thing, and therefore swamp AUSTRAC with suspicious matter reports, and it becomes difficult to discern which are the real issues from just the noise. In the case of some of those organisations that you've referred to, particularly, for example, in the case of Westpac and Crown Casino, the issue was more deficiencies in respect of the reporting, in not providing reports which they should have put in. Apart from suspicious matter reports, there were reports about international money transfers and things like that that were simply not put in when they should have been. And that created a significant deficiency in terms of the intelligence that AUSTRAC has available over the periods where that occurred to be able to share with law enforcement and national security and other agencies, both domestically and internationally. Because what happens at the back end is that this intelligence is made available to those organisations. And of course, those organisations have other bits of information. So it's a bit like the mosaic effect in that they can put AUSTRAC information in with data which they have themselves obtained and obtained from other agencies and be able to paint the bigger picture, identify individuals, identify situations which they can then investigate. It's not evidence, it's intelligence, but it's very, very useful intelligence, and depriving AUSTRAC and the agencies it shares information with of that intelligence can cause significant detrimental issues, which I think was the case with particularly those organisations, because there are investigations which could have occurred into organised crime and other entities like that.
So with the legislation, the changes that have been put in place and coming into effect, do you think they're going to have... what sort of impact do you think they're going to have on, like, Cambodia, which was referred to in your submission? And we know that poorer nations are taken advantage of, and we know, Pacific Islands are also a target. Can you give us any further information on the impact you think this is going to have, and whether or not, how much further we need to go?
Well, in terms of immediate impact, hopefully it will result in an increase in quality intelligence to AUSTRAC, particularly from the new group of reporting entities. AUSTRAC has had its resources supplemented to be able to deal with the increase in reporting. So hopefully that will be effective for it to be able to get valuable intelligence from that extra reporting. I fear that the primary deficiency and as I said at the start, what is required to make these changes effective is the beneficial ownership register that we still lack. A beneficial ownership register with verified data, or at least a substantial means to ensure that that data is actually correct, is actually true. That will not only benefit law enforcement and other operators, but also it will be as it were, a source of truth for other reporting entities as well in regard to their know your client obligations, and will therefore potentially have an impact in their compliance costs as well.
So I would take it from your evidence today, that would be probably your strongest recommendation to the committee, that register be established. But you're establishing it to make sure that it's the best it can possibly be by looking at what's worked in other countries where there's some gaps and filling those from the initial establishment of it.
Correct, that's right. I think that would be of significant benefit to not just law enforcement, but also other reporting entities who have the know your client obligation and who could rely on that as a source of truth. Law enforcement have also other means of ascertaining certain information in respect to beneficial ownership, but having that as a port of call, I think, would be of significant benefit in making these changes effective. And I think it's going to be one of the issues, of course, which the Financial Action Task Force will be looking for when it comes to review Australia shortly.
And is there any other issue that you wanted to put on the public record today as another priority for the committee to consider when we're putting our report together? I mean, your submission, as usual, is very detailed and very informative, and greatly appreciate the effort that's gone into it and the work that you do. But if there's, one or two other things that you want to put on the record, now's your opportunity.
Thank you. A beneficial ownership register is the primary thing which we're advocating for in this particular area of anti-money laundering. We, of course, advocate other things in other areas, but in terms of the terms of reference here. I just add, in regard to that, one of the things which did cause us concern when there was debate of the anti-money laundering legislation changes, and which still remains a bit of a concern because it is unclear how it will be handled, is how far legal professional privilege may take a hand in terms of preventing suspicious matter reports in particular, which should be provided to AUSTRAC from being done. Now, the anti-money laundering legislation, the changes to it, preserve legal professional privilege, and that's maintained. But it is not clear, and I don't think AUSTRAC has issued any guidance as yet in terms of this issue, how that's going to play out, particularly in respect of the suspicious matter reporting obligations of lawyers. This is an area which of which there was considerable debate, particularly with the Law Council of Australia, and which raised quite a bit of angst in the legal community. We would hope, TIA would hope, that the legislation is interpreted in a way which facilitates the proper provision of reporting, particularly suspicious matter reports, and that will help ensure that essentially the effectiveness of these reforms is maintained, given that lawyers as well as, I guess, accountants are considered some of the primary facilitators, wittingly or otherwise, in terms of some of this money laundering activity.
Yes, indeed. I was very pleased to see these changes, and as you said, we just got through the Senate. So I don't have any further questions, but I do just want to put on record the committee's appreciation of your very detailed submission and for you making yourself available today. It was greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members.
Thank you.
We have our last
Witness, yes. Are they ready?
Yes.
Oh, good.
He's online.
Great. Okay. Might finish a bit early. Oh, amazing. Oh, very interesting.
That was really good.
Yeah, they're always good. I'd now like to welcome officers from the Northern Territory Police Force. Are you there? Hello?
He's still on mute.
You're still on mute? Can you hear me? Well, you're on mute, but I now will welcome you officially, and I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to parliamentary committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and capacity in which you appear today, and then I'll invite you to make an opening statement. Going to have to call. Okay. We'll just take a short suspension until we can get you on the phone. Get Hansard, they're back on board, so I will again now welcome you again as officials from the Northern Territory Police Force, and I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to parliamentary committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today, or on the phone?
David Brian Richardson. I'm a Detective Superintendent of the Northern Territory Police Force. I'm representing the Northern Territory Police in this inquiry today.
Thank you. Do you have an opening statement to make or any comments in relation to this inquiry?
No formal opening statement. We've provided written submissions on the 20th of June 2024. In the recent round for submissions, we did not provide any further information.
Great, thank you very much. Just in relation to, from your perspective then, can you just outline to me the sort of experiences that you've had in this area, and to what extent is there an impact on your community, and whether or not there's a direct impact or on our First Nations peoples?
But money laundering in general in the Northern Territory is, I would like to say, probably in its infancy in relation to how we investigate money laundering. We've got a very small team, and we've got some other, I suppose, pressing priorities around the Northern Territory which prevent us from probably assigning as many resources as we'd like to the money laundering space. Having said that, we do have that up and running now, and our probably inaugural prosecution in relation to money laundering offending will be going ahead in early 2026. Having said that, through other investigations that we undertake, majority of them being drug-related investigations, we do see elements of money laundering occurring. I've detailed a lot of those, or they have been detailed in the 2024 submission in relation to types of money laundering that we are seeing. And we generally do see a lot of money that is going out of the territory to other states and jurisdictions, to money laundering organisations interstate, to be washed and subject to money laundering proceedings. I wouldn't like to speculate in this environment on where that money is occurring. All I could say is that a lot of drug-related offending does occur in remote communities. We do see a lot of drugs that go in and out of those communities. So money is obviously being utilised or spent in those communities, and would no doubt therefore form a part of these money laundering investigations.
So would it be, from your experience then, are there issues relating to money mules being used to move funds offshore? You've seen and had some experience up there, and would that be accurate in terms of the sort of activities, and that usually those most vulnerable can end up being victims to that crime without realising that they've been brought into that type of crime?
I think the latter is definitely true. The former part of that question, though, a lot of the money we are seeing with the use of money mules is going interstate from the territory. We're not seeing a lot of evidence of it going directly offshore from the territory. I'm not saying that does not occur, but a lot of what we are seeing is money going interstate. Whether it goes offshore at that point in time, I'm probably not qualified to talk about that.
Just reading back through the submission you made, that was made previously. Have you seen any evidence of increased money laundering over the last couple of years?
I'd say that it's becoming more pertinent to us because we are starting to focus more on it. Whether it has increased or not, I don't believe I could put a sort of a quantifiable level to that response.
So how many is in your team then that's now looking at money laundering?
It's only two.
Two officers?
Yes.
Based in Darwin?
Yes.
And in relation to crime, drug crime, how many officers would you have investigating those activities?
Approximately, I don't have the final figure, it's about 40.
Right. So what's the size of the police force up there? As close as you can get me to a figure.
As long as you don't hold me particularly to it'll be in the annual report for the exact figure, but it's around the 1,500 mark.
Right, thank you for that. So in terms of, sounds to me that there's been a fair bit of emphasis on illegal drug activities, which is probably taken a fair proportion of the police force's time and effort. And usually when you're looking at drug activity, organised crime, there's always that branch of organised crime that then goes into money laundering. Was that one of the reasons that you established a couple of officers to start investigating more money laundering, or what was the catalyst for having the unit established?
I think I suppose as the NT matures to the way we investigate things, we have seen through other jurisdictions that commencing investigations where the money is sometimes is a very viable way of uncovering serious and organised crime, no matter what the type of product, or whether it be drugs or other offences that they may be doing. I think we're trying to slowly move towards money laundering and looking at the money side of investigations. We know that can have a lot of impact. We're just probably progressing our strategies to start further resourcing that space, but we are a fair way away from probably supporting that investigative strategy. I think we've got a lot of layers to put in place before that happens.
So you have a major fraud unit that's obviously looking at fraud. Is that also looking into scams as well?
Yeah, so within the major fraud unit, they do. We also have the cybercrime unit in there, and they have the cyber incident reporting tools that see a lot of those scams occurring within the Northern Territory. And
I assume that all those units and the one that's been established looking at money laundering, you would have a closer working relationship with the AFP?
Yeah, we have a good working relationship with the AFP on a number of fronts. But yeah, we have a number of things going at the moment where AFP are engaged in those processes.
And resourcing of the resourcing for the two officers that are investigating money laundering, what sort of extra resourcing and IT has been provided to you?
That's part of the layers that we're trying to increase. We have just put a submission in through the AFP on the back of some tobacco funding that they have to increase some dedicated IT platforms in relation to being able to better analyse and more rapidly analyse financial data. But that is something that we're still putting in place in the Northern Territory.
Right. So from your perspective, what are the challenges for a small unit like yours to be able to counter money laundering? Because the criminals seem to know where it's easier to do business than where they've got more resources that are dedicated to try and to capture and shut these illegal activities down. So are there things that you're concerned about that you need more resourcing for? Do you need more engagement and education from the AFP and other agencies?
Yeah, look, I think all of that would be of assistance. And as I said, NT is growing in that space, but it is something that two officers we acknowledge is not enough at this point in time. And the reality is that we're seeing a lot of things on the back of major drug and organised crime investigations that money laundering is falling out of those investigations. That's what's progressing our first prosecution in the early part of next year from a large investigation that we did here in Darwin. Operation Pelt is the reference to that. But obviously the restrictions that we have are resourcing that we have to pick what we can do. We're realists that we can't do all money laundering investigations. However, where we're not picking up in money laundering, we obviously are seeing significant seizures. We're seeing significant work done in the drug and organised crime space, which does have an effect of shutting down some of these organisations from operating in the Northern Territory. We had a large body of work done around illicit tobacco here in the Northern Territory, which inextricably has a link to money laundering, purely from the money that is taken under the counter for illicit tobacco. We shut down a large syndicate that was operating here in Darwin by attacking that syndicate. Now, unfortunately, we weren't able to attack the money laundering space for that, but that is something that will form a part of our work going forward.
Well, sometimes these drug busts actually do some really good, when you close them down, you're also reducing their ability to launder money. So sometimes it may not be direct attack on them, but it does have some good benefits. So congratulate you on that work. I was interested in your submission that you also touched on something that our previous witness spoke about, and that was that this second trench doesn't it's great going, including real estate agents and accountants and lawyers, which is fantastic, but they would like to see it go further and actually have a responsibility for people selling luxury items to also have to report, because that's obviously an easy way to money launder, whether it's high-end fashion, furs, whether it's jewellery, watches, handbags that I could never afford, but it in a place that is smaller like the NT, if somebody starts splashing around money like that, I would have thought it'd be easier to identify and then to question. Suddenly someone's driving a new car, walking around in high-end accessories, that would send off alarm bells to people. Does that help? And would you like to actually see those goods having to, high-end luxury items having to be reportable as well?
We just intercepted a vehicle coming over the border for drug offending, and that also had high-end luxury items, purses and the like, names that I certainly can't afford to buy in it. So it's a definite thing that we are seeing in the Northern Territory, and I think it would be beneficial if that was on there. We didn't add into our written submission the other category of person. However, it is potentially relevant, particularly in the Territory, is livestock agents, which weren't included in the initial submissions. Yeah. We would submit, though, that livestock agents have similar trust accounts and the like, and the quantity of money that's moving through them similar to real estate agents. Well,
absolutely. If you look at the cost of some livestock and also horses as well. I mean, it's an area that no one else has actually brought up. So both the Secretariat and I have just made a note of that, because I think, again, it's an obvious one if you are in the Northern Territory, or if you're in those industry. We know how easy it would be, just as it would for art dealers to be able to, I mean, I would have thought a pretty obvious one. If you look at what happens internationally with art and the people who own some of the most beautiful artwork that's never seen in public and not always gained legitimately. While you have the opportunity, is there anything else that you would like the committee to ponder on as we go about developing our final report and making recommendations?
No, I think that was the only thing in addition from our written submission that I could add for today.
Can I just ask if you got any further detail that you would like to put forward on the livestock agencies and elaborate around, because I think trusts has been one of the topical elements of this inquiry today from witnesses about trust accounts that are established. And yes, of course, we are now including to make sure that accountants are caught in this. But, you know, there's always legitimate reasons for having a trust, and then there are those that are set up for other reasons. So if you have any further detail, if you could provide that. I'm not asking you to write, a 20-page submission, but if you've got a few more details that you would like us to be aware of so we can consider that, we would be very appreciative of that. And if you could get that to the Secretary before the 9th of December, as I said, just a little more detail about that so that we could substantiate that, because I think that's an element that no one else, as I said, has addressed, but I think that's a very important one as well. So,
no problem, so we'll do.
And can I just again thank you for the submission that was made previously, but very importantly for making yourself available today. I know when you've got limited resources that there's always lots to do, so we appreciate you giving your time and participating in this inquiry today.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So that concludes today's hearing, and thank you again to all the witnesses who appeared, to Hansard and Broadcasting as usual for their great work, for the Secretariat, the committee, as I just said to the final witness, and they were the only ones who took anything on notice, to have that back to us by the 9th of December, and the committee stands adjourned.